"You think this is your son?" Adele said. As Mankechi's hands froze around the newborn, her heart was hammering in her chest. The voice came from the doorway. Adele, the man who had promised her a child. But this wasn't the child she had imagined. The baby in her arms wasn't hers to keep. "This child is not yours," Adele continued, stepping closer. "You were just the vessel. The harvest belongs to the farmer." Her blood ran cold. No, he's mine, she whispered, clutching him tighter, but Adele's cold eyes told her otherwise. "I have come to collect him," he said. But hey, before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss out on more intense stories like this. Stick with us to the end. I promise you won't want to miss what's coming. Mankechi had always carried herself with dignity, despite the heavy burdens of her life. Yet, as the years wore on, the pain of her empty womb became unbearable. At 50 years old, her body had long since been deemed barren by the village. A woman's worth here was measured by how many children she had to care for, how many voices called her mother, and Mankechi had none. Her womb, long silent, was seen as a dried pot, discarded and forgotten. The other women spoke of her with pity, if they spoke of her at all. They whispered behind her back, their voices full of judgment, but their words reached her ears clearly enough. "Look at her," they would murmur, casting fleeting glances her way. "Her hands are for pounding yam, but not for rocking a baby." Mankechi's heart ached with each whisper, each harsh, callous remark. She tried to ignore it, but the sting was always there, gnawing at her. She would walk through the market and feel the weight of their eyes on her. The children, their innocent faces full of curiosity, would point at her. Their mothers, embarrassed, would quickly usher them away, as if her barren presence was a disease they could catch. It was in those moments that the loneliness settled in her bones, a cold ache that refused to leave. Every night, she knelt beside her bed, praying to the ancestors. Her voice was hoarse from years of desperation, but she didn't care. "Please, just one child," she would beg. "Let me bear a son, a daughter, to carry on my husband's name. Let me not die alone in this empty hut." The seasons changed, the crops were harvested, and yet her prayers went unanswered. Year after year, the moon would rise, and her belly would remain empty. No answers, no child, just silence. One evening, just as the sun was setting and casting an orange glow over the village, a stranger arrived in Umuaha. His appearance was striking, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose presence seemed to fill the air around him. His skin was the color of rich, dark soil after the rain, and his eyes held a depth that made you feel as though he had seen the beginning of time itself. The villagers watched with a mixture of curiosity and fear. He asked for the oldest widow, and they pointed him to Mankechi's hut, whispering about the stranger's odd presence. When he arrived, Mankechi was sitting outside, mending an old fishing net. She looked up, startled by the sudden shadow falling over her. "Good evening, Mama," the man greeted her in a deep, resonant voice that echoed through the night air. She froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't proper for a widow to host a man, especially one who was a complete stranger. But there was something in his gaze that made her pause. It was neither threatening nor hurried. It was like he already knew what he was looking for. "Good evening," she said softly, lifting her head to look at him, the words heavy on her tongue. "How may I help you?" "My name is Adele," he said, introducing himself with a calm certainty. "I am a traveler seeking rest for the night. Would you kindly offer me shelter?" She hesitated, her mind racing. She had no bed to offer him, just a simple mat on the floor. But she also knew the weight of her loneliness, the emptiness of her hut. "I have no bed to offer you," she said, her voice quiet but polite. "Only a mat on the floor, but I can offer you yam and stew." Adele smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I would be grateful," he replied. Mankechi nodded, and despite the propriety of the situation, she found herself allowing him into her humble home. The fire crackled in the corner of the hut as Mankechi prepared a small meal for her guest. The silence between them was heavy, but there was something about Adelaide's presence that made her feel as though she was not alone in the world. As they ate, he remained quiet, his dark eyes studying her in a way that unsettled her. It was as if he could see into her very soul, as though he knew her deepest desires, her silent pain. When the meal was finished, he sat back, his gaze not leaving her face. "You are lonely," he said, his voice like a soft rumble. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a truth that felt as though it had always been there, unspoken between them. Mankechi felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't speak at first. How could she? She had spent her life in solitude, in isolation, her heart constantly yearning for the one thing she could never have. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am. I have no children, no family. I am barren." Adele leaned forward, his gaze still locked on hers. "You wish for a child," he said softly. "A son, to carry your name. A child who will give you purpose in this world." Mankechi's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat. It was as though he could hear her thoughts, her deepest, most desperate wish. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling now. "I've prayed for one. For so many years I've prayed." Adelaide's eyes glimmered with something unreadable. "I can give you what you desire," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "I can give you a son, a strong, healthy boy who will make the village respect you." Mankechi's breath hitched. How? How can you give me a child?" He looked at her for a moment, then his gaze dropped to her belly. "The body is a vessel," he said. "A field may be dry, but with the right seed and a strong enough farmer, it can still bear fruit." She stared at him, confusion and disbelief mixing in her mind. Was this some kind of joke? Was he mocking her pain? "I am too old," she said quietly, almost to herself. "My time is gone. My womb is no longer a place for life to grow." Adele's expression didn't change. "Age is for mortals," he replied, his voice steady. "I can give you what you want most. A son, a child who will make your name live on." Mankechi's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Could it be? Could he truly give her a child? A real child? A son? She hesitated, her mind racing with doubt. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice small, almost a whisper. Adele's eyes softened, and he leaned closer. "I want nothing from you now. You will give my son life. That is your part of the bargain. Just accept my gift." Mankechi's heart pounded in her chest. A gift. But at what cost? What did this strange man want in return? She opened her mouth to ask, but the words died on her lips. Her longing for a child, her desperation, overpowered any sense of caution she had left. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will accept your gift." Adele's smile was faint, but there was something dangerous in it. He stood, his tall figure looming over her. "Then tonight, we will fulfill the promise." The days turned into weeks, and Mankechi's body began to change in ways she could never have imagined. At first, it was subtle, a flutter in her stomach, a strange dizziness that would wash over her when she stood too quickly. But soon, the changes became undeniable. Her body felt alive in a way it hadn't for decades. Her once dry and barren womb was no longer silent. It stirred with life. At first, she tried to dismiss it, telling herself that it was the result of too much thinking, too much worrying. But then, she felt it again. A strange sensation deep inside her, like a seed taking root, growing against the current of time itself. Mankechi knew something was happening to her. She had lived long enough to recognize the signs of life, of growth, but this was different. It wasn't like anything she had experienced before. Her body, once frail and worn, now felt stronger, more resilient. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, steady and rhythmic. She felt a power coursing through her veins that she hadn't known existed.
She went to the village herbalist, the oldest woman in Umuaha, known for her deep knowledge of healing plants and the secret workings of the human body. The woman, her face wrinkled with age and experience, took one look at Mankechi and gasped. The old woman's hands trembled as she placed them on Mankechi's abdomen, feeling the soft swell beneath her fingers. "This is impossible," she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean?" Mankechi asked, her heart pounding. The herbalist stepped back, her face full of confusion and fear. "You are with child, Mama Kechi, but this cannot be. Your body, it is too old. The ancestors do not work such miracles." Mankechi's chest tightened, her heart racing. She had hoped, prayed even, that this was real. But hearing it from the herbalist, hearing the fear in her voice, made her doubt everything. Could she really be pregnant? Could the impossible have happened to her? Her mind flashed to that night, the strange, surreal night with Adele. She remembered the promise he had made, but could it truly be possible? Was this a gift, or was it something darker? The weeks that followed were filled with growing wonder and terror. Mankechi's belly began to swell at an unnatural rate. She could feel the child growing inside her, but it wasn't the slow, steady growth she had imagined. No, this was rapid, frighteningly so. Her body seemed to stretch beyond its natural limits, the skin of her stomach taut and shiny, as though the child inside her was not like any other. The villagers, who had once whispered behind her back, now began to stare openly. At first, they thought it was a joke, a trick, but as the months passed, the truth became undeniable. Mankechi's pregnancy was impossible. She was too old to carry a child, yet here she was, larger than any woman they had ever seen, her belly growing at an alarming rate. The whispers grew louder. "It's a miracle," some said, awe in their voices, but most of them were frightened. "This is unnatural," others muttered. "The gods do not work such wonders. She must be carrying something else." Mankechi felt their eyes on her everywhere she went. The other women no longer whispered about her barrenness. Now they whispered about her madness. They avoided her, as though she were a walking omen, a curse they didn't want to touch. But still, she pressed on. The child inside her kicked and turned, and she could feel his strength growing with each passing day. It was as though the child was not just growing within her, but reshaping her. Her body felt strong, almost too strong, and she began to experience strange cravings, foods she had never desired before, tastes that felt foreign yet satisfying. Her senses sharpened. She could smell the rain days before it arrived. She could hear conversations from across the village, and the hunger, oh, the hunger, was insatiable. She would eat an entire pot of yam and stew and still feel empty. It was as though the child inside her needed more than her body could give. But despite the miracle growing inside her, a deep fear took root in her heart. She had longed for a child. This was her prayer, answered in a way she could never have expected. But what if it wasn't a blessing? What if it was a curse, a punishment for her desperation? The thoughts plagued her. What had she done by agreeing to Adele's offer? She couldn't shake the image of his cold, calm eyes, the certainty in his voice as he had promised her this child. Was it truly a gift, or was it something darker? Something that had been planted inside her, something unnatural, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't foresee? She thought often of the stranger, of Adali, and the strange union they had shared. Was he truly a man, or something else?
Something more ancient? Something more powerful? The questions haunted her, and with every movement she felt within her, every kick, every turn, she wondered if this child was meant for her at all. The sun was just beginning to set when the door to Man Ketchy's hut creaked open. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air grew heavier, the room colder, and her breath caught in her throat. She could feel his presence before she even saw him. Adale, the man who had promised her a son. She hadn't seen him since that strange, unthinkable night. He had come, offered her a child, and then left as quietly as he had arrived. But now, with the birth nearing, he had returned. She had hoped that perhaps, just perhaps, the strange events had been a dream, a fleeting fantasy of a lonely woman desperate for what she could never have. But as the door opened and Adale stepped into the hut, his towering figure darkened the doorway, she knew that this was no dream. His presence was calm, unwavering. He walked into the room as though he had every right to be there, his eyes locking with hers. "The time has come," he said simply, his voice smooth, like the deep rumble of distant thunder. His words were not an offer. They were a command. Man Ketchy's heart beat faster, her hands trembling as she looked down at the child in her arms. She had carried him for so long, fought for him, prayed for him. But now, the truth of Adale's words came crashing down on her. Her miracle was not hers to keep.